and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Steven Spacco, and this is ArmorMagnus. Who is one of the most popular and recognizable figures in the entire G.I. Joe line? We'll find out. Coming up now.
He'll fight for freedom wherever there's trouble. G.I. Joe is there.
It's here, the G.I. Joe collection. Infantry Trooper. Codename Grunt. Bazooka Soldier. Codename Zap. Motor Soldier. Codename Short Fuse. Laser Rifle Trooper. Codename Flash. Ranger. Codename Stalker. Communications Officer. Codename Breaker. Machine Gunner. Codename Rock and Roll. Counterintelligence. Codename Scarlet. Commando. Codename Snake Eyes. Each sold separately. G.I. Joe from Hasbro.
Most popular and influential characters of the entire G.I. Joe line. Of course, we're talking about Snake Eyes. G.I. Joe was relaunched in 1982 in the new 3 3/4 inch figure line. It was going to compete with Kenner's Star Wars figures, who they were able to make more vehicles and everything because the figures were smaller. Now today we're going to be learning about one of the most popular and influential and, quite honestly, my favorite character and my first character that I ever had as a kid in the entire G.I. Joe line. We're going to be talking about Snake Eyes. Now this Snake Eyes is the same Snake Eyes that I got back in 1982. I don't have a lot of the figures from that time. I had almost everything from 1982 to 1985. In 1985, I even had the USS Flag, and I had, of course, the hovercraft and the base by that time. Now, when I left on my mission, I was gone for 2 years, and I did have a whole box of G.I. Joe and Transformers and Mask and Voltron, as well as a ton of different Hot Wheels. And unfortunately, when I got back 2 years later, and I got my stuff back, I literally only had just a shoebox full of a few Broken Joes, as well as a couple Transformers and a couple Hot Wheels. But one of the figures that made it through was my Snake Eyes. This is my 1982 Snake Eyes. So today we're going to be talking about him as a character and why he was so popular. Now, Larry Hama did a great thing when he created the G.I. Joe line. He gave them a backstory. He gave them personality. He gave kids a reason why they should care about these characters. Now, on the back of Snake Eyes' file card, it had a lot of classified stuff, okay? His birthplace and his file name were classified. Later, his serial number was classified. He wore a completely black mask with a black visor and a black uniform. Really, to any kid, this could be them. This could be anybody. And in most of the time, I did put myself into Snake Eyes' shoes. He was the character that I played with most. And honestly, I can't remember a time when I was playing G.I. Joe, whether it was my Arctic missions or my desert missions or whatever else I was doing. I can't remember a single time where Snake Eyes wasn't there in some form or another. Now, I got my Snake Eyes. I was with my grandparents, and we were at a Toys R Us or a Toy City. At the time, I did live in California, and we had both Toys R Us and Toy City. Unfortunately, Toy City went out of business a long time ago, many years ago, before I moved to Arizona. And Toys R Us, of course, went out of business last year. And we're hoping that Toys R Us will be back in some form, probably under the name Jeffrey's Toy Box, somewhere in 2019 or 2020. Now, what happened on this day that I was with my grandparents is they took me to the store. We were walking around. They had said that I can get something. And I remember seeing all the card art, all of these figures on the pegs. And the one that I picked out was Snake Eyes. Now, Snake Eyes to me was exciting. He was a commando. He was mysterious. He wore all black. And I did show my grandparents that I wanted this figure. And I remember my grandmother saying, "You want this little doll?" And I said, "No, Grandma, this is an action figure." Now, one of the things that made G.I. Joe my favorite thing when I was growing up was the fact that it had all these file cards written by Larry Hama. It gave us backstory. It gave us reason to care about these characters. And I would read these file cards over and over and over again. I would constantly read them. And I enjoyed rereading them, even though I had read them 100 times. Now that file card led me, as both growing up and in high school, and even as an adult, to create my own characters, to create backstories for these figures that I had created. Now, a lot of the figures that I had created had a superhero influence because of the fact that I did grow up with X-Men, and I grew up with DC and Justice League. So a lot of my characters did have a superhero flair to them. But to this day, I've created over 300 characters, unique and individual characters that I've written at least some portion of a backstory for. An entire universe created around these characters. And hopefully one day I'll be able to have a Netflix or a Hulu or an Amazon Prime series. I've written the screenplay and gone back and forth, and now my current design for what these are has changed drastically over the years. But at its heart, these characters were something that were conceived back in the 80s and into high school and now today in 2019. So hopefully one day I'll be able to publish some stuff about my original characters. But none of that would have happened without Larry Hama and the G.I. Joe file cards. Instead of just a generic action figure, a generic commando, a generic army guy, we had characters, and we had characters like Snake Eyes. Now, Snake Eyes, in 1982, he was part of what we call the Green 13, part of the original line of G.I. Joes. Most of them had green or were mostly green. They wore green camouflage or green fatigues. The two exceptions were Snake Eyes and the one female of that time, Scarlet. So actually, those two characters ended up being my two favorite. I would play with these figures. Outside, I would play with them. I would put them in trees and create scenarios. And I'm sure that I'm not the only one, but I'm sure a lot of kids lost a lot of G.I. Joes and their equipment from playing outside because they were realistic. They were fun to play with. You would bring them over to your friends. They would bring theirs over to your house. And I had a few friends that we did play, and it was exciting. I didn't have every single character, but I had quite a few. I had a good majority of the figures from 82 to 85. Some of the interesting stuff about Snake Eyes is he had a lot of the skills from a lot of the different characters. And I'm going to show you throughout this that some of the stuff that Snake Eyes could do. He was an expert in mountaineering, in desert, in Arctic survival, in underwater demolitions, hand-to-hand combat. He was a commando. So a lot of great things. And if you look at the file cards from 1982 to 1985, he does share a lot of characteristics with a lot of them. Now, one of them is infantry, because they're soldiers. Infantry would be one of the main specialties. But he was a character that excelled at a lot of things. And then in version 2, which came out in 1985, he was given more of a ninja backstory. He was part of the same ninja clan as Storm Shadow, the Arashikage. He was part of the same clan. Now, Snake Eyes, in the comics, he was a soldier in Nam. He served with Stalker, Lonzo Wilkinson, and with Tommy Arashikage. He also served with Wade Collins. Now, Wade was presumed dead. They found out later in the comics that he had ended up joining Cobra along with Storm Shadow, but he joined Cobra and was one of the Crimson Guardsmen. Now later on, Snake Eyes would go on to train a lot of the different ninjas, along with Storm Shadow, but train a lot of the ninjas, and one of them was Sean Collins, who ended up being Kamakura. Kamakura ended up taking his role as Snake Eyes. Snake Eyes ended up training Wade Collins' son, Sean Collins. So it was interesting all the way around, all the way from Vietnam to, you know, his time with the G.I. Joe, and then with Wade Collins and Storm Shadow being part of Cobra, and then them training Kamakura together later. Storm Shadow would eventually join the G.I. Joe team, and we find out a lot about him, and I'll get into more of his story. So Snake Eyes is linked to a lot of the characters in the Marvel and IDW runs. He was romantically involved with Scarlet. He was obviously served with several members of both G.I. Joe and Cobra. We find out later that he has ties to Zartan. He has ties to Firefly and even Cobra Commander himself in one of the iterations. So it's very interesting when you follow Snake Eyes' story. He's one of the central figures in the Marvel Comics line. Now let's take a look at the actual figure. Let's take a look at what they did and how they did it in 1982. And I'll show you my original one. This is the 1982 version, and I have one that's mirrored after the 1983 version. It actually came out in the 2000s, but it's very similar, so I'll show you that too. Okay, let's take a look at the very first edition of Snake Eyes. This is the 1982 edition. He's actually considered one of the Green 13, even though he has no green on him. He's made up of entirely black plastic. All the other G.I. Joe characters of that first year, 1982, all had green fatigues of some sort. The only two exceptions were Snake Eyes and the version 1 of Scarlet. This is the exact figure I bought in 1982 with my grandparents. Let's take a look at the sculpt. He has a black hood and a black mask and a black visor. You can see the detail of the holes there. In his black shirt, you could tell it's a turtleneck type shirt. He's got a pouch on his right shoulder and a grenade. On his left shoulder, he's got another pouch with a molded on knife. You could see his belt buckle is molded there. His belt has 3 grooves and connects in a belt buckle that looks very similar to an H, probably for Hasbro. On his back, you could see where you would normally have a backpack and support. And this little hole is for any backpacks that you would have gotten with these characters. Now moving down on his legs, you could see some sculpted explosive pack there. And then you could see some boots with some straps on them. Same on this side. This leg, you've got 2 pouches there. On his right arm, he's got a pouch. Again, you could tell that it's a turtleneck style shirt. And likewise, he's got that another pouch on this side. Now, one of the problems with G.I. Joes from the 1980s is they were made of hard plastic. As you could see here, the thumb is broken off mine. Actually, he has no thumbs. Both of them are broken off. And so, unfortunately, he cannot hold his weapons. Now, this was the 1982 edition, and as far as articulation, you can move his head back and forth. You could swing his arms all the way around. They can go up and around. They can do all sorts of fun stuff. His legs can go up and out, and they can bend at the knee and all the way back. He's got some stretch there. Now, one of the differences between the 1982 and the 1983 when they re-released these characters, if you notice here, he has no articulation in the arm other than at the shoulder and at the elbow. In 1983, they re-released the characters in swivel arm, and it made it so that the character could move his arm in and out. Now, this particular one is not the 1993 edition. This is a later one that was included with the DVD pack. But it's good to just show what they did. Here's a side-by-side comparison with that DVD pack and the very first edition. Now, when you look at the cartoon, the original cartoon, Snake Eyes' suit actually did have a bluish color to it in the first few episodes. And so this dark blue is reminiscent of that very first episode. However, this is my version of Snake Eyes with his mask. This is what I've grown to expect from Snake Eyes. This is how he looks. Even later versions of his visor were different. This one is still the one that appeals to me the most. Now, Snake Eyes is a character that was not able to speak. He had lost his ability to speak. Several different variations have existed over the mythos of Snake Eyes, but what had happened was he was in a helicopter crash and he lost his ability to speak. So in the cartoon, it was hard to animate and get a lot of interest without somebody else telling the audience what Snake Eyes was actually saying, where he would symbol. All right, let's take a look at the figure's accessories. This is his Uzi that came with him. You can see that it's got quite a bit of detail on there. Zoom in there a little bit. This was the very first Uzi, and it became a staple of this particular character. Now let's take a look at a modern G.I. Joe figure. This is Snake Eyes version 30 that came out in 2008. Now technically, up to this point, this is the 32nd version of a Snake Eyes figure. In 1982, you had Snake Eyes version 1. In 1983, he was re-released, which has become known as version 1.5, which had some slight modifications and the swivel arm. Also in 2005, there was a character just named Classified, and he was in his army fatigues, and it was Snake Eyes, Stalker, and Tommy Arashikage in a 3-pack. Now let's take a look at the back of the card. Here we could see the 25th anniversary celebration, celebrate 25 years with the Ultimate Action Team, and you could see the cross-sell with all the other figures at this point. You have Snake Eyes version 2 with Timber, and you also have Snow Job and Stalker. You also have Firefly and Beachhead. So there was a lot of different figures that were in the cross-sell at this point. Now, here's his file card. Let's go ahead and read that. Commando, codename Snake Eyes. Codename is Snake Eyes. His file name is Classified. His military specialty is infantry. His second military specialty is hand-to-hand combat instructor. His birthplace is classified, and his grade is E5. Snake Eyes is proficient in 12 different unarmed fighting systems, karate, kung fu, jiu-jitsu, and is highly skilled in the use of edged weapons. He has received extensive training in mountaineering, underwater demolitions, jungle and desert and Arctic survival, and some form of holistic medicine. Qualified expert, all NATO and Warsaw Pact small arms. This man is a total mystery, but he's real good at his job. Heck, he's the best. Now, it doesn't say who that quote is from. I believe that it's from Stalker, but one of the interesting things here, all NATO and Warsaw Pact. Now, his Uzi is an Israeli weapon, okay? This is an Uzi. The Uzi was The Uzi was manufactured in the 1960s. Now, interesting thing, since it's an Israeli weapon, Israel was never part of NATO or the Warsaw Pact. So basically what that was doing, the Warsaw Pact was letting it be that all the small arms that they were using at the time, they were pretty much documented. Now, when it says he's a qualified expert, that's, to me, that's just saying that he has practiced with hundreds of different firearms from that era. Really interesting stuff. Now, on the third, this one has the cross cell with all the different figures. You could even see the second version of Snake Eyes there. Of course, here's the version that we're looking at. But it's got a lot of different characters. Let you take a look at that. Celebrating 25 years with the Ultimate Action Team. And this really was the Ultimate Action Team. I mean, these file cards, when you read these, most of them, the early ones were written by Larry Hama. And it was great to have characters with backstories, to have life. And quite honestly, with Snake Eyes, he was my favorite. Not only was he my first, but he was my favorite because this could have been me. He was anybody. It was unknown who he was. He was a man in a mask. The guy's a total mystery. It could have been me as 10-year-old Steve. But I love Snake Eyes. Let's take a look at the actual figure, comparing him to the 1980s version. Now let's take a look at the modern figure articulation. Head moves around 360 degrees now. It does have up and down movement. Arms go all the way around. They go up. It does have movement at the elbow, and now it also has wrist articulation. These modern figures have what we call an ab crunch feature because it no longer has an O-ring. And the knees are now double jointed. They can go all the way back. His ankles twist all the way around now. And they have a little bit of movement. So as you can see, there's a lot more posability to the modern figures compared to, but I still like and collect a lot more of the original versions. But these are both versions of Snake Eyes, and I like them both, and I'll display them both. Some collectors will put just vintage or just modern. I like to display all my Joes together. It doesn't matter what line they're from. And so here is my very favorite and my very first character, Snake Eyes. And I'm so glad to do my first episode on my very first G.I. Joe character, which I still have. I want to thank you for joining me on this journey. I'm so grateful for everybody who watches this. I'm grateful if I can inspire one person to follow their passion. If you love something, do something about it. Follow it, read about it, make videos about it, research about it. I find myself, now that we have the internet, when I learn about a character, then I learn about another character, and then I follow that, and I figure out that, you know, his main weapon is an Uzi, and it's Israeli weapon. So from these file cards and from these characters, I have grown a passion for it. And I encourage everybody, if you like something, go for it. Enjoy it. As an adult collector, I used to be embarrassed. In the 2000s, I actually had way more Transformers. I had hardly any G.I. Joes. I had collected them when they started re-releasing Transformers, and that became my thing to collect up until just recently. But I was a little bit embarrassed to share this with anybody. I was embarrassed because here I am, this adult, and I've got toys, and I collect toys. And I've come to realize that it doesn't matter. It's something that I love. It's something that I love learning about. And that's okay. Some people like the Cowboys or the Steelers. Some people are Suns fans. Some people are hardcore car enthusiasts or golf or whatever. Whatever you enjoy. I want to thank my family, my wife Jeanette, my sons Eric and Caleb for helping me on this journey and helping me to get involved in something that I enjoy talking about. This year I've got a lot of things planned with some interviews. I'm gonna be going to some shows, and I'll have some video footage from those shows. I'll be co-hosting with a couple different people this year, so I've got a lot of stuff in store. So make sure you hit like and subscribe. Make sure you hit the YouTube notification button so that you can be notified when I've got new content. I promise to bring you stuff that I enjoy. Not every character is going to be my favorite. There was a lot of characters in the G.I. Joe line, unfortunately. Anybody that's collected G.I. Joe, they have their favorites. There's some that are just, to me, kind of ridiculous. And that's all right. I don't have to like every single thing about G.I. Joe to love G.I. Joe. I don't have to like every single Transformer to really enjoy collecting Transformers. I want to give a special thanks to Carson over at 3D Joe's for letting me use the artwork that you saw here on the video today. When I reached out to Carson, he was gracious enough to let me use that. You should definitely go check out 3djoes.com. There is some fantastic reproductions of the artwork and the file cards and the figures, pictures with the figures on the cards. Take yourself back to the 80s. Go look at that stuff. It's amazing. So Carson, thank you over there at 3D Joe's. Check him out. While you're waiting for my next video, make sure you check out other YouTubers or other people that talk about G.I. Joe. One that I want to mention today is one of my favorites. It's Hooded Cobra Commander 788. Check out his channel. Check out his stuff. He's got a lot of stuff, and he focuses on the vintage line. Now, for those of you who are new to G.I. Joe, the vintage line covers from 1982 to 1984. So he's going to primarily talk about that stuff. That's his niche. There's some people that focus on the modern stuff. There's some people that focus on both. This channel, we're going to focus a little bit about everything with a strong emphasis on the vintage stuff. So stick with me. If you want to support the channel, feel free to hit me up on Ko-fi or Patreon. I do have accounts set up. If it's something that you need to send to the show or would like to donate to the show, feel free to message me, and I can get you an address to get that out to me. Again, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey. It's exciting. It's fun. I get a chance to talk about something that made me happy as a kid, and quite honestly, it makes me happy as an adult. Just a side note, my wife has decided to take me to Transformer Con this year. And so she's getting excited about learning about G1 Transformers. And I'm excited to share it with her. And so I appreciate that she wants to be involved in the stuff that we do. I want to thank my boys. Again, thanks for tuning in today. I really enjoy doing this stuff. And hopefully my videos can come out on a regular basis. This video, of course, has taken me quite a while. I'm learning the filming, I'm learning the video editing, I'm learning sound effects and all of that. So this video is taking me a while, but that's okay. In the comments, if you could, make sure you put who your favorite character is and who was your first character. If that's the same person, great. If you had a favorite character but it wasn't your first, give me both. Tell me who your favorite is. Tell me who your first. Tell me your stories about how you got your first G.I. Joe. Mine was walking through the store with my grandparents and picking out Snake Eyes. I want to know what you have. So again, thanks for joining the channel. I'm Steven Slocco, and this is ArmorMagnus. And Yo Joe!
Fight for freedom wherever there's trouble. G.I. Joe is there. G.I. Joe, American hero. G.I. Joe is there. It's G.I. Joe against Cobra and Destro, fighting to save the day. He never gives up, he's always there, fighting for freedom over land and air. G.I. Joe! American hero! G.I. Joe is there!
G.I. Joe is the code name for America's daring, highly trained Special Mission Force. Its purpose, to defend human freedom against Cobra, a ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world.
He never gives up, he'll stay till the fight's won. G.I. Joe will dare. G.I. Joe! G.I.